colleagues from different organizations that we have been working on issues, different issues, one of them drone. And I'm going to introduce the speakers now. Please feel free to, in the chat box below your page, you can post your questions if you have any specific questions for any individual speakers over here. And also, you can get their contact information if you're interested to continue your conversation with them and you don't know them already. So I'm going to briefly introduce our three speakers. I start with Noor Mir. Noor was the anti-drone campaign coordinator for Code Pink and is now running a student campaign against drones. She is based in Washington, D.C. office, although she calls Islamabad, Pakistan, her home. She graduated from Bristol College in 2012 with a major in political science and minor in French and English. While studying abroad at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, she took courses in international law and targeted killings and was driven by what she learned to turn into a research project on drone warfare in Pakistan that she has extended into a lifelong project. Noor is passionate about ending killer drones, humanitarian law, and race relations. The second speaker is Judy. Judy Bello is active with the Upstate Coalition to ground the drones and end the wars, and with the Fellowship of Reconciliation Middle East Task Force, as well as with local peace and justice organizations in her hometown of Rochester, New York, and is on the administrative committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition. She has been participating in the Upstate Coalition's Gandhian Wave at Hancock Air National Guard Base for several years, where activists persistently draw attention to the illegal and immoral piloting of hunter-killer drones over Afghanistan by Hancock's 174th Attack Squadron. Judy represented Fellowship of Reconciliation in Pakistan through Code Pink Peace Delegation in fall of 2012. She believes that justice and respect for the sovereignty of all nations is critical to building world peace. She also believes that the way to build a more just and peaceful society is for people to reach across international, inter-ethnic, interracial, and intercultural boundaries to form a global grassroots network for individuals working toward peace and justice through love and understanding. And the third speaker is Nick Motton. Has worked as a reporter, researcher, writer, and political organizer over the last 30 years. While in the U.S. Navy, he was in Vietnam in 1962-63. He graduated from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism in 1966, and he was worked as a reporter for the Providence Journal and Evening Bulletin, a researcher and writer for the former U.S. Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, a lobbyist for Bread for the World, and a writer and co-organizer of speaking tours in the United States on U.S. involvement in Africa for Miraculon, for Fathers and Brothers. In this job, he visited a number of African nations and war zones in Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Mozambique, as well as Israel and the West Bank. He is the author of Suffering Strong, recounting experiences of his first trip to Africa. He has also been involved in grassroots actions in the lower Hudson Valley. He manages two different websites. I will post the web addresses here in the chat room. He was director of the 2012 National No Drones Tour and was an organizer of the 2013 April Days of Action, a national campaign to stop drone war and drone surveillance. He is currently working with the with others on Spring Days of Action 2014, a similar campaign force on April and May. I will post more information about each speakers, specifically the websites that they manage, and you can find more information about their activities. So I start my questions with the first-hand experience. Noor, you recently visited your homeland, Pakistan, and just give us some information. What did you learn? What did you hear? What did you get? What did you felt when you visited there and talked to some victims, maybe, of drone victims?
Every time I go back, I feel as though the conversation is more and more complex as it is presented in the United States. And I know that Nick probably learned something similar at the panel that he attended with some Pakistani scholars and academics yesterday in New York City. But essentially, right now in Pakistan, we have the Pakistanis engaging in peace negotiations with the Tehreek-e-Taliban Party, or the TTP. And, we have opponents to these peace negotiations mainly because of the fact that the Taliban are viewed very unfavorably by a common Pakistani citizen because of the havoc that they wreak. So naturally, there are people that believe that drones are necessary, and I don't hold that against Pakistanis, because they do suffer from the onslaught of suicide bombs and such. However, right now, I don't know if any of the viewers have been caught up with the news about the fact that Pakistan also has its own drones that it's just started using in the tribal territories to take out the Taliban. So that really brings up arguments about, is it okay for drones to be used if they're being used by the Pakistani military and they're manufactured by Pakistan? So that brings up a really interesting conversation. I'm excited to hear what other people have to say about that. For me, what I learned is that I need to keep pushing for activists to move away from the sovereignty argument, which people use, saying that drones are a violation of sovereignty, instead of thinking of it in that way, because of course war is always going to be phrased as something that's a violation of sovereignty. I think it would be much more effective if we started viewing it instead as the systematic economic oppression, as well as the systematic violence that is directed towards people living in the tribal territories. That's what we really need to be focusing on, is that it's not only the U.S. drones that have been terrorizing people in these strips for years, it's also the Pakistan government and Taliban and the Mujahideen that have been using this tribal strip as an accessory and a tool for war countries. That's what we need to be focusing on when thinking about drones. And every time that we try to hold the United States accountable, we also have to hold Pakistan accountable, because I think that the
Thank you, Noor. Although we had some difficulties hearing you, at least I had difficulties hearing you at the last sentences that you mentioned. But based on what I heard, I have a question. Do we have a special target for using drones? Who are the drone targets? Anyone wants to answer? I think Judy, maybe.
I would speak for just a moment.
So, I mean, the question of who who drone targets are. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Intermittently.
Yeah.
We can hear you, but you've disappeared.
Okay. I'm back.
I have background noise. You're breaking up, Noor.
Yeah. Noor, my suggestion is if you can just log out and log in again while Judy will respond to this question.
Well, there's one thing. I think the headphones that she had, I saw when she was moving her hands that it was waving the wire around. So that may be something that...
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Kind of.
Um, while you are working on that,
Here, I'll
yeah.
speak for just a moment on
Yes.
it. Because it's not only Pakistan, it's the same wherever the drones are used. Somalia, Yemen, Afghanistan. The poorest and most disenfranchised people on earth are being targeted by the drone. And the excuse they're using is they don't know how to find them. It's hard to understand how much of a threat these people can be to us if we can't even find them. The One of the issues that I like to tell people is that these are people who don't have any drones of their own. They don't have any airplanes. They don't have any helicopters. They don't have any tanks. They don't have any missiles. The people that we're targeting with these high-tech weapons cannot defend themselves. And I think we need to understand that when people call them terrorists and build this huge threat, that the populations targeted are people that do not have the resources to defend themselves and who do not have the resources to make a significant attack against us. And we really need to ask ourselves and our government, why are we attacking these people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing I think I could add that I picked up last night at this forum that was attended. I'd say all the members of the forum were Pakistani. The U.S. military and government are completely intertwined with the Pakistani military, and so although these drones may be operated, quote unquote, by the Pakistani military, I think that the people on the forum last night would argue that, in fact, this is still a manifestation of U.S. policy, and that these drone attacks would not be conducted without U.S. approval, and that, as one of the participants told me, that the United States cannot get along in that area without Pakistan, and the Pakistan military cannot get along without the United States. And she's done a lot of study, written a book, and this whole combine of U.S. Pakistani military interest and might, certainly around the resources of that area, are something that have to be addressed as a unity rather than as questions of individual governments behaving independently.
Thank you. But responding to this, and also the information you all three of you shared, my next question would be: do we have like good people using drones, bad people using drones, or is drone use good at all? Could be in a good use for drones? So, yeah. Are you ready, Noor?
Yeah.
Great.
So I've heard a lot about the good use of drones, especially when you're dealing with the pro drone lobby group and kind of the conversation that they put forth, and they kind of frame the use of drones in a humanitarian way and say that drones can be used like for life-saving purposes, for firefighters, etc. But when we think about that humanitarian framework, and I'm sorry to get a little academic here, but I'm kind of inspired by what Madiha once said, and I heard her talk about technophilia and how it can be really harmful to a human rights dialectic when we're talking, when people say that, this is something that's going to save lives. We also have to think about the power dynamic, and we have to think about the kind of lives that drones save or may be used for here in the United States for life-saving operations, and how different that is from their more popular use, which is the use of killer drones. So I just hope that everyone listening, that, when you see those advertisements saying that drones can be used for good purposes, they can be used in remote areas to help people that are suffering from various natural disasters, yes, that is a great development, but that comes hand in hand with the billions of dollars that we're pouring into developing things like autonomous robots that are already on the way, and there's a campaign against them. And when we're thinking about how much of our taxpayer dollars go into the military development of drones, that, in my opinion, is wholly ineffective. So I just ask that everyone keep that balance in mind. That whenever you say that there is a lesser evil, you also have to understand that lesser evil is still evil. So.
Well, I could comment on that too, if I might.
Please.
We're working right now. I'm working with several people and have sent out a piece of legislation for some comment called the Drone Control Act. And this would be something that would address both the international and domestic use of drones for killing and for surveillance and for other uses, and to try to define very specifically what would be the, let's say, the peaceful uses of drones and who would control that inside the United States. So this is done in preparation for the spring days of action in April and May to try to give organizers a tool for going to Congress and making demands for legislation. And it's the thing that you raise about good and bad is very important, I think, for people organizing in this country, because this is something that comes up all the time. And with this piece of proposed legislation, we try to be very clear about the definitions and what's accepted and what's not accepted for this kind of conduct. And I think that in a situation where the drone makers are calling up this idea of good uses, it's very appropriate to ask that they condemn the bad uses as well as speak to the good uses, which is something, of course, they're not prepared to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have, Judy, do you want to add something?
Actually, just briefly, yes. I want to turn back to you talked about good versus bad uses, but you also talked about good people versus bad people. Mm-hmm. And I want to make it very clear that the people targeted by drones, by and large, are not proven to be bad people. They are, none of them have had any due process. None of them have been, they are suspects, not convicts. They are they are people that happen to be in the vicinity of the suspects. They target someone who is sleeping at home in a household with his extended family, his children, his brother's children, his parents, whomever. They target people who, they target sources of noise like weddings and celebrations. They target gatherings of people just because they happen to see a bunch of men sitting together. So I think we have to be very careful about talking about this whole idea of having a surgical way of getting rid of bad people, because this is not at all what's actually happening with the drones. The drones are used in a promiscuous manner without the discrimination that would really be required to use a weapon like that, and especially in a context where there's not even a war like Pakistan. And the fact that I agree that they're getting the Pakistani government to do it for them. And in Yemen, they get the Yemeni government to take responsibility when they can't, fill in. But in the end, the reason that's happening is because they put people in power who will do what they want. And those people are in power because they want power for no other reason. And because they're willing to do what the United States asked them against their own people. So it's a complete destruction of the positive ability of a society to exist, and a complete oppression of any kind of ability to have a civil society. Let's not forget that. Thank you.
When I have you here, Judy, I want to ask you, because of the experience you have, you recently were in prison in Syracuse. So tell us about the action that you took and the reason of your imprisonment. And please, Noor and Nick, if you feel you want to add anything, please feel free to do that.
We've had a series of actions at Hancock Air National Guard Base because they are flying. They are the domestic hub for flying MQ-9 Reaper drones over Afghanistan. So there are other bases doing it, but most of the Reapers over Afghanistan are piloted from Hancock. These drones carry 4 Hellfire missiles and 2 500-pound bombs, and are generally launched in groups of more than one. So the people of Afghanistan are, really oppressed by these drones. People are killed on a regular basis. So we decided that some of us had actually just got back from Pakistan. We decided to go to the base and to block the gates, to let them know that we don't want them doing what they're doing. So we did do that. We blocked the gates. We went out, mostly the front gate. So we went out with cones, traffic cones, and we strung out across the driveway to the front gate and held up banners and signs saying, some of them facing inward to the gate, some of them facing the road, saying that, to stop flying these drones and to stop killing people. We also have an indictment, which we read to the guards in the gate. The police came. Some people went to one of the side gates, but we were there a really long time. They didn't really make any effort to disperse us. So some people actually went to a third gate. And although they say we blocked all 3 gates at that point, I would say that I still believe it's a symbolic blockade because they never opened those gates. There were people standing in front of them. There were 17 people, not 100. So at any rate, we were nonviolent. We were completely compliant, except that we didn't leave until they escorted us away.
So Judy, they say your action was illegal, and that is why you went to court. And
right.
You and some of our friends went to court, and they went to prison. So, is using drone by the United States, both surveillance drones here at home and also abroad, militarized drones. So, is that legal?
Well, according to the laws that exist, the international laws on the books, no, it's not legal. It's not legal to attack a country that you're not at war with. It's not legal to go to war. Actually, there was a law signed in 1928 by the United States. In fact, it was drafted by representatives of the United States and France. It's called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which says that it's illegal to go to war with another country for any reason. And the United Nations Charter says the only reason you can go to war is to defend yourself. And although our government claims self-defense when it sends these drones over the countries that they're using them in, Pakistan, Somalia, Afghanistan, wherever, the reality is that these are people who, as I stated before, have no way to retaliate, much less to really start a war with us. So it's kind of a strange complaint. So, yes, these wars are illegal. They violate United States law. There's a law within the United States that says that it's illegal to assassinate people. Mm-hmm. And we are assassinating people in these countries. And that law was actually developed because members of the government kept trying to assassinate Castro, mm-hmm. and Fidel Castro in Cuba. And finally, Congress got together and made a law and said you cannot assassinate people overseas. That, we have to put our entire country under the rule of law. So when we go to court, when I went to court, they say you're accused of trespassing and of blocking traffic. But we say you're accused of killing people for no reason, of murder and mayhem. You're accused of starting wars and attacking people who can't protect themselves. So in the big picture, we think that that's more significant in that we need to keep that attention to that. So We did go to jail this time, and everyone went to jail this time. The last time only I went and another person that I was out there because the base really feels threatened by our actions because there's a lot of money invested in the drones. And because there's a lot of these people, these men who have actually taken out orders of protection against us, so most of us don't know who they are even. The base commander, his career is dependent on keeping drones attacking people in Afghanistan from Syracuse. And I feel sad about that, but the reality is it's misguided, and that there are other ways that our government could be utilizing the military, utilizing. There are other ways that we could be making peace in the world. We're never going to make peace by attacking people, anyone who, we choose anytime we choose. So,
thank you, Judy. Now, actually, when you say this, I'm not sure if this is something that, Nick, you were promoting in the last April Days of Action, and you think this, the actions that Judy and her friends and our colleagues took is something that you are working on for these Spring Days of Action? What is the plan, and why Spring Days of Drone Action?
Well, I think that what we did last year in April was very effective, and I think some of us feel that had something to do with why President Obama felt compelled to give a speech in May about his drone policy. There were, I think, 68 or 70 planned actions across the United States during the month of April, and clearly the United States this year is continuing its drone killing policy. The White House is now debating another assassination by drone of an American citizen. But part of the thing I think that we're very concerned about is the expanding deployment and use of drones in the Pacific and in Africa. And you asked about the question of legality, and I think one can argue that the intensive drone surveillance is unlike other kinds of surveillance and is in fact itself a hostile act. And so when you introduce Global Hawk drones into Japan to be used against China, you're taking a hostile act against China. And this is happening in many other parts of the world. So if we have a more comprehensive view of where the drone deployment is going, as well as its actual use and killing, I think increases the need for us to look at and to be active to prevent any further expansion of the drone use, because it's going to lead to more and more war. And so that's why in these 2 months, it gives organizers a way to concentrate their activities and make themselves felt in a political way, not only with respect to being arrested, but to lobbying members of Congress if people wish to do that, undertaking artistic work in the community around drones, doing any number of things. There's a kite flying project that people have, so it's a time when people do have renewed energy after the winter, time of, I think, a lot of imagination. And so in the colleges, particularly, we think that we're going to see more action, and this is going to be building on all that's going around with the XL pipeline, with mass incarceration. There are a number of things School of America's Watch that are going to jump off in the spring. And so we want to be part of that movement of resistance that I think is really developing in this country right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
May I add something about the April Days of Spring?
Yes, please.
Or the April Days of Action. At Hancock, we have been having actions in April for the last 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. So we have Last year, 31 people were arrested, but the day before that, we had a wonderful group of workshops that were so that people could learn about drones. And so we've had civil resistance actions every April. This year, Cornell West is coming to speak, and then we will again have actions around the base in Syracuse. So I think that it has made a difference, because when I first put our website up, I put up a news archive, and I had trouble finding enough news to put anything in it. I only had to look at it once a week. But now there is so much news that I can't include it all. So I think we really started a discussion about the drones in Syracuse. No one really knew about the drones at all, but our actions are covered on all 4 channels on local TV and across upstate New York. So I think that's why everyone everywhere needs to keep being active around the drones, because we need an informed public. There's no way, we can really manage the government except by having the people really understand what it is that needs to happen.
This actually, what you said, it's really amazing, and what you all have done, it's really great. But Noor, I have a question for you. Based on your information, first-hand experience that you have, you visited Pakistan. Is this the actions that we do here is something that Pakistani really want us to do? What do they want? What do they want us to know? And what do they want us to do on their behalf?
I think that there is definitely publicity and knowledge about what we do here. And of course, as with all sorts of activism, there are negative and positive responses, but the truth is that there is more accessibility to activism here, especially for us to be standing out on the street and be able to protest at any time. That's something that we have to recognize as a privilege that we have, being activists in the United States. But while we do that, I think it is effective. Just recently we had the case of Karim Khan. I don't know how many people are familiar with
Would you please tell us a little bit, just briefly?
Okay, so Karim Khan was he was one of the first people to come forth from the tribal territories in Pakistan. FATA is what the acronym is, and his brother and his son were killed in a drone strike in 2009, and he became part of a lawsuit against the United States government and the CIA that is currently going on in Pakistan. Has been and they have plenty of people that are people in the United States, including a lot of South Asians, such as Madiha Tahir, Sadia Tour, etc., ran a campaign called Free Kareem, and created a lot of noise about what was going on. And surprisingly enough, he was released. He wasn't exactly in good shape, but he was in good spirits. So I'm just saying that if you believe that you can make change, there is a way to make it happen. And we should really be proud of the activism we do. And as a Pakistani, I am proud of what I do and of what my allies that are from all over the world do. And I understand that there are people who think that drones are okay, but I think the only way moving forward is by educating and continuing this kind of activism. I think that Pakistanis see when these things happen and they're thankful for it. So we can't stop.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So Nick, is this what Noor shared with us is something that you are planning for Spring Days of Action. What should people know, and what are your suggestions?
Well, first of all, we have every week a weekly bulletin that tells people what others are planning or what ideas people are having for April and May.
Where people can find this?
Okay, they can go on our website, which is knowdrones.org, knowdrones.org, or Google Spring Days of Drone Action. And that will put you on the a web page on War is a Crime. When you get to that web page, you'll find resources for organizers, and that's also on No Drones. And so people can click on any one of the subjects under resources and find things that can be very helpful to them. But I think that the main thing I want to say is that it's very important to have any kind of manifestation against the drone killing and the expansion of the use of drones in the world during April and May. And that can be, ranging from sending a letter to the editor, to leafleting, to demonstrating, to getting arrested, holding teach-ins, whatever your imagination and inspiration, wherever that directs, is where you should go on this, because this is a very key moment in the evolution of this policy within the United States. Things are not clear within this administration or within the Congress about how to deal with this. And the debate over assassinating this person suggests just how much contention there is. So we still are at that moment when we can turn things away from this kind of killing and intrusion. And so it's wherever your imagination, inspiration, and willingness to just be out in the street, even though we're told, I grew up thinking a good citizen stays at home and votes. And so my miseducation wasn't overcome until I was probably about 35 years old. So I think that, conveying what it means to deal with politics is also part of, what people need to come up against right now.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a set of last questions for each one of you. And if anyone has a question, please, you can just write it in the chat box and hashtag the specific and individual speaker that you want to ask the question. My last question to Noor is, do you have any objection toward the domestic use of drones, surveillance drones here at home in the United States?
Absolutely. I have a lot of problems with how excited people are about the domestic use of drones and surveillance drones. We have state-by-state legislation where they are trying to ban drones, and some have been successful on a city basis. But when we're thinking about the use of surveillance drones, especially those that could be weaponized by police departments, we're really entering a new and dangerous field. And the way I was talking on a panel recently at Amnesty International about this, and we were, and the term that we were discussing was how this really is a stop and frisk from the sky, and the way the very same way that a disposition matrix, which is essentially how killer drones are used, is depending on a set of characteristics that define a target as a target. So, I'm seeing some comments here on the chat box where they're talking about what does it mean to be an enemy combatant, and can they be, is that an assassination? Well, I really like to ask the person that asked the question to contemplate on what enemy combatant means to you, and enemy combatant is about as vague in the contemporary military era as the AUMF. We have no real understanding of what the associated forces are. We have no real understanding of what enemy combatants are. Oftentimes, there are people that may look like enemy combatants, but unfortunately, in some parts of the world, people tend to look exactly the same. So it's difficult to distinguish who is or isn't an enemy combatant. I think that's something that we need to explore further. And that's the very same thing that will happen with surveillance and the domestic use of drones, is that, the way that the police departments operate is in a very skewed power dynamic. You have them infiltrating lower income boroughs in places like in New York City, and you have extremely invasive and illegal practices like stop and frisk targeting mainly young men of color, and that is exactly the same way that killer drones are used. They're used to wipe out young men of color that are between the ages of 16 and 50 because that's military age. So what this is a war against is brown bodies around the world, and the sooner that we begin to view it through a racial lens and begin to view it through an economic lens, this is a systemic and systematic war against people of color, and the reason that people are accepting it blindly is because they're becoming naturalized to this kind of dialogue. So that's what we need to resist, is that the same way that the police department brutalizes bodies of color in the United States is the same way we're doing it abroad. So I see no difference between the way we would be using domestic drones, whether they be weaponized or surveillance drones, and the way we use weaponized drones abroad. It's the same targeting process, and it's the same. And I have no qualms in calling it genocide, because in my head, this is what it really is.
Could I add just something to that?
Please.
Yeah, at the forum last night, Madhya Tahir, who has made this film, Wounds of Waziristan, had quite a good discussion about the use of language and how in the press there are terms applied to people. And this is what Noor was talking about: militants, civilians, innocent victims, this kind of thing, where people are really, in a certain way, turned into a category. And in point of fact, anyone who's killed by a drone is an innocent person, because they have not had the benefit of any legal process. And so all people killed by drones have to be viewed as people illegitimately killed by drones. And the distinctions made between women, children, innocent, militant, and all that is really for the consumption of us here to try to legitimize something that is profoundly evil and illegitimate.
Thank you very much, Nick. I want to ask a question to you, Judy, regarding what Nick said, and he mentioned women and children. But we hear all the time that drone is very smart. Using drone is like they are using smart target. So that means we kill specifically and exactly the person who we want to kill. So we never have casualties. Is that right?
Absolutely not. They, as I said before, they target sometimes even when they have a specific target who might be considered someone you might want to capture. I don't think there's anyone that should be killed outright, but they often target him while he's like sleeping in somebody's house with an extended family around him, and a dozen people die, and then they target the rescuers who would come afterwards, in case some of them might be someone who's a problem. They target groups of men because, again, they say, well, if they're men, they must be militants. And I'd like to make a remark on the term militant that I started thinking about. Militant is used as if it were synonymous with the word combatant, which is a legal term in international law. And it has to do with someone in a war who's got you in the sights of their weapon, basically. That's a combatant. A combatant is somebody who's right there, and if you don't do something, they're probably going to harm you. But a militant, that isn't what a militant is. Not even by the United States definition. The United States says that a militant is anybody who might have ever participated in the war, or who might at some time in the future become an enemy. So I guess their thinking is that no women or children are going to take up arms. So, but all men at that point become militants, because they may have at some point participated in a battle, or they might someday choose to. So this is a highly misleading term. When they substitute the word militant for combatant in the language of international law, they're substituting something very diffuse for something very precise. And again, everything around drones is not precise. A drone flies 2 miles in the air. I encourage everyone to go and look at the videos on YouTube if you don't know what a drone actually sees. Because I know I heard all the stuff about precision, and then I went and looked on YouTube, and they're like little characters in a video game that you see on the ground. There's no detail. You can maybe see how they're dressed, and if you think that being dressed like an Afghani male makes you a warrior, then so be it. But you might be able to follow an individual, but you can't see who it is you're following. All that is decided by, say, if they're tracking a cell phone that the NSA has targeted, or maybe they paid an informant on the ground to point out someone and drop a chip in their pocket that the drone can track. But there isn't any precision to this at all. These methods are all, would not be allowed in a court of law. It would all be secondary information, and it would be thrown out. So how can you kill a person?
Call back in half an hour?
Thank you. I see that Noor wants to add something to the previous question. Noor? So I guess we lost Noor. But I have my last question to you, Nick. I started to know you through the drone replica. Why? And what is good that for? Do you suggest, what is your suggestion for people who order them, who have them, and who want to use drone models in their actions?
Well, right now we have made 22 different, drone models, replicas that are 8 feet long and have a 11-foot wingspan. They're spread in different parts of the country. Some people are using them a lot. Some people are using them a little. If anybody wants to have one of these to use at a demonstration, I know that people who have them are willing to, most people are willing to loan them out. And you could be in touch with me, and I can tell anybody how they might find one that's close by where they are. And I can give my email address. It's my name.
You can type it in the chat box.
Okay, I'll do that right now.
Okay. And Judy, also you please type your email address if people want to contact you.
Yes, and also our website for Upstate Drone Action has an excellent website with a lot of documentation.
Yeah, I posted the drone. I posted the website addresses all the time here, so people can go through them. I will do that again. We have Noor again, and I know that she wanted to add something to the previous question, so please do that.
Okay, well, I think the chat room is really heating up, so I wanted to respectfully address some of the many questions that are brought up, because they're really rubbing me the wrong way. So some of the things about the medical supplies and food being dropped off, I think Alice asked the question. I had never heard of that before, and I've been doing research on drones for years, but maybe if that's something that has been happening, I would love to read more about it, and I encourage you to send that to us. And something else also is people talking about how drones are cowardly, and I really hope that when we're thinking about drone pilots, I think the conversation really needs to change. I mean, I'm friends with plenty of people that were former drone pilots, and it's not an easy job. A lot of them suffer from the same levels of PTSD as do people working on the ground, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is still targeting people. And I really encourage people who think that it's it's something easy to look up the many interviews by folks such as Heather Linebaugh and Brendan Bryant, and hear about what they went through and what they've seen. And hopefully from a military perspective, that's something that people can learn from. Lastly, people are talking about how drones are accurate. And I'd really like to bring attention to the recent piece written by Glenn Greenwald. So if you look, I'll put the piece in the chat room. But he was talking about the links between the NSA and drone strikes, and how the way that the NSA and the military work together. And something that really struck me in that article was how he was talking about, after a meeting, the Taliban puts all these SIM cards in a bag, jumbles them all up, and somebody leaves with a different SIM card. So when we're thinking about if drone strikes are surgical and if they're precise, if they're targeting a phone that doesn't actually belong to who they're intending to target, I would say that's a failed drone strike. This is actual information that has been investigated, so I wouldn't say that that's something that's accurate. Lastly, I really think that overall we need to think about what we hear and how much information we have about drone strikes. I'm seeing a lot in this chat room about how I mean, I just see Pakistanis and Afghanis being described as some sort of primitive animals that are ready to attack and pounce. That's not how humans operate, and I think that you really need to be thinking logically about the history of war and about the history of war in the regions of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and how we have been utilized by the United States during the Cold War, and how the Mujahideen and the Taliban came to be. Once we understand what's going on in that context, maybe we can think about how the Taliban came about and what we can do to address them. So I just hope that we can learn from history and then have a better understanding of why what's going on is going on. So I would just hope that people contemplate and ruminate on that rather than jump to conclusions about people of different races and nationalities.
Well, with respect to precision, the blast radius of a Hellfire missile is 60 feet. And if you're within that radius, you're going to be killed or seriously injured. If you go on the Lockheed Martin website, you can see videos of the Hellfire missile blasts that they use to sell the weapons. And so when you're talking about precision, under those circumstances, it's preposterous. And we have to just really keep recalling, as we talk with people in this country, just how much lying everybody has been subjected to. And we're swimming in this sea of objectification of virtually everybody, including people in this country. And when I was listening to this forum, and they were talking about how the press, views the Pakistani people and wishes to see everybody as a thing, I felt like I'm reading about, and I'm hearing about the press here in the United States. And so a lot of what we've been talking about here is the re-education of ourselves, as well as the people we're dealing with, and to how terms are used. And so the president can go on and talk about precision because people here have absolutely no information about what is exactly happening on the ground in these places.
Yes, may I comment?
Please.
If you drop a 500-pound bomb, it's much bigger than a Hellfire missile, and Reapers actually carry those. And if you drop that on a house, everybody in it is going to be killed. If you, when they talk about precision, it's hard to understand that, say, if there's a meeting of 50 men and one of them is a suspect, not even confirmed to be anybody who matters, and they kill 45 people with 2 or 3 Hellfire missiles, targeting this group of people sitting out on a lawn somewhere in chairs having a meeting. How can you, judge those people who are completely engaged in their own activities? And really, they have no interest in ours. And the Taliban, from the very beginning, even when they were trained by the United States, they were being trained essentially to take control of their own country, not to come and attack people outside of the country. During the war in Afghanistan back in the 80s, when they were training people in Pakistan to fight the Russians in Afghanistan, they essentially were training orphans in orphanages to become the fighters of the new war, because those were the people that weren't part of the tribal culture and could be co-opted by the powerful. The rich and powerful people who, that the textbooks that they used were printed in Nebraska, where they did, all their math problems. If you shoot 3 people, and there was 5 in the room, how many are still alive? Kind of questions. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's true. These things were done by our country, and we of course are not informed because the people in power don't want to have any criticism of what they're doing. And just one last point, this guy that they're discussing whether or not they should kill him, in this American in Pakistan, he has no name. They don't give us his name. They haven't told us what they think he might have done or be about to do. They tell us they don't know his location. And I believe that what this discussion is really about is for them to have a general permission to target Americans in these environments. Because if it really was about a specific individual, they would do like they did with Anwar al-Awlaki, and they would demonize him in the press. They would tell you over and over what an awful person he is. But they're not doing that. They're saying this nameless person who is a nameless threat in a nameless location, who happens to be American, shall we kill him without any due process? Shall we murder him? And if they are allowed to give themselves that permission, then there'll surely be other people, because the name doesn't matter and the mission doesn't matter and the location doesn't matter. This is just looking for a blanket privilege. And the fact that there's no details, I don't know how that affects people. Maybe it makes it easier for them, but it's asking for something very broad. And it could be someone who someday they're going to be targeting tourists in these places, because if you're there, you must be guilty of something. And I really think this is a very, very dangerous precedent for American law.
Thank you, Judy. There are questions here in the chat room that if any of you feel relevant to, and you want to respond, please feel free. But there are 2 questions that are here, and I would like to ask, and please feel free to respond. Any of you who feel comfortable with the question. One is, I think, if I can find the question, it says just Pakistani government announced just 4% of victims were civilians. I want to know if you have any further information on that. And there is another question that says, do police need permission to shoot an American here in the States? And if they need to shoot an American in self-defense, and they don't need permission. This is the comment. Do you have any, Noor?
So I've been reading those questions. I'm having a really hard time processing some of the comments on the chat room.
Yeah.
I feel deeply offended by some of them, so excuse me if I can kind of appear to be a little angry. But firstly, I think that if you think that that police actions against American citizens are in any way fair, then I really beg you to pick up the newspaper and hear about the amount of wrong shootings that the cops in this country are involved in. The police in the United States is a highly dangerous force that is under many investigations and lawsuits for the police brutality that is directed towards the citizens of this country, especially people of color. So yes, I would hope that the police would have more processes before they decide to pick up a gun and shoot children and young black men in this country, but unfortunately that doesn't exist. So I think that the police and the military are very similar in their knee-jerk reactions to seeing people that they term as dangerous. So I would say that, yes, I wish that they had that kind of permission. Unfortunately, they don't. Similarly, yes, if Edward was here in the beginning of the panel, perhaps he listened to when I was saying that the Pakistani government is indeed complicit in drone strikes. But as Nick touched on, we have to think about the power dynamic in the region. We have to think about the amount of aid that the United States uses to bribe Pakistan to use its land. And we have to think about how these reports I mean, Pakistan originally said that there were a lot more civilian casualties than that. Then suddenly they decide to drop it down to 4%. I find that to be highly suspect. And I think a lot of that has to do with the many meetings that occur behind the doors. And I'm not somebody who's conspirational at all. I keep away from conspiracy theories. But I'd like to say that there are far more casualties than 4%. In fact, oftentimes, most of them go unreported. It's really hard to access the sites where drone strikes happen because of something called a double tap, which is, I mean, maybe some people that are listening are familiar, but if you rush to a rescue site, there's a chance, and the American government has done this plenty of times, where they then attack the rescuers. So how are we supposed to have any accurate idea of what's going on in the ground, how many people have died when their bodies are blown up and they're not allowed to pick them up, to take them to the hospital because they fear their own lives? So I think that the only thing that we can depend upon is investigative journalism on the ground. And I know somebody already shared a link by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. That's what I turn to when I think about drone strikes. And I beg you on the chat room to be looking at those figures instead, to not trust the government that is already lying so much about our military operations around the world. So that's my 2 cents on the topic.
Well, I'd like to comment on what I think is the ground from which this kind of a comment comes, and that is that we feel as citizens of this country that we have a right to kill anyone that we think might be a problem for us. Now, of course, legally that is a problem because you really can't preemptively kill people that you feel may be a problem for you. And you really can't go kill somebody that you've seen kill somebody else. These are essentially the things that we're trying to supposedly defend this country against, which I think is bogus. I think we're there to grab people's resources. But let's just say we are there to defend ourselves. Well, then we have to use the rule of law and treat this as a criminal problem, not as a military problem, first of all. And you really have to go and try people and sentence them. You can't go execute people. And out of this, I would say, white supremacist attitude of the United States, this mentality translates into how the police in this country behave themselves, which is any person of color that appears to be problematic, from saying something that they don't like to doing something that looks suspicious, is open for killing. And it happens regularly. And demonstrations are held here saying it can't happen again, but yet it happens again. This is the mentality that we're up against. And this is where some of these comments come from, that we white people feel, yes, we can kill people who are a problem for us, regardless of what the nature of that problem is.
And I'd like to just briefly comment, too, that, how can we claim the power to go in and kill anyone that might someday be a problem and then turn around and call them barbarians? I mean, who is the barbarian? Who's the one going in with an automated weapon, killing people who are just living their lives on the ground? And even if they were trying to defend themselves from us, don't they have a right to? It's their country. I'm not sure. I think it gets turned around in people's minds who's the victim and who's the aggressor in these situations. These people in Pakistan, Afghanistan, these are living their lives in their own countries. And we are an outside force, and we're saying that we're helping them or that we need to defend ourselves against them. Well, they've never left their borders. It's us that are sending automated weapons over their country. And until, we take responsibility for our own space, I don't know how we can accuse them. And in the ghetto, if they, again, if they're killing people of color, which they do, and not to forget the Native Americans we committed genocide against them. And while our country is demanding that the Turks apologize for what they've done in the past and demanding that, this country or that country is committing genocide, there's never been any question about the genocide against the Native Americans in this country. And people need to look at that, because that's a precedent that for the behavior of the American military and for the perceptions of American people for many years, for the entire length of the country.
That's true. Thank you very much. Is there any other comments or questions in the chat room that any of you are interested to respond? If it's not, at the end, I think we are almost done. I just want to also bring this book to your attention. It's the Drone Warfare by Medea Benjamin. Some of you who don't know much about drone, maybe, or some of you who know a lot, but also you want to learn more about the killing by remote control, I recommend this book that Medea also is in a tour. You can contact Code Pink, or maybe Noor is a good person to contact. So for learn more about this tour, and maybe you can invite her to your community. Thank you very much, and be well, everybody.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who joined us today.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.